A very warm welcome to all of you from my side. My name is Klaus Axel Müller. I'm the chair of the Infrastructure Advisory Group, and I'm chairing the session today, the open day for discussing the access policy to the infrastructure of the EuroHPC joint undertaking, the upcoming. And we are presenting the results of the Infrastructure Advisory Group, especially the work group for access policy. The agenda of today, so I think we had the registration and the coffee. A short welcome from my side on the scope of the workshop. Afterwards, I would like to welcome Gustav Kalve, the CEO of the EuroHPC joint undertaking. He will give us a short overview about the state of play of the actual activities of EuroHPC. And then the major topic is the presentation of the access policy work group led by Sergi Girona, and he will present the actual results we have and to present it to the open public, to discuss it, to collect all the comments and other recommendations. And we will collect this during the meeting, and I hope we will put it into the overall recommendation we have to give to the joint undertaking. We will have a roundtable discussion from 11:45 to 12:30, and afterwards a summary and a closing remarks. There will be a lunch by invitation only. You can see it on the yellow spot on your sign. And I would think then we have some time to discuss it again. I would like to thank the colleagues organizing this event, Raluca, I don't know if she's in the room, and Marjolaine and Vangelis organizing this event, and thank you very much for helping us. Some words about the INFRAG, the Infrastructure Advisory Group. Here you have a list of names helping us to discuss the different topics, especially the strategy for the upcoming years of the joint undertaking with respect to the infrastructure. And many of the members of the group are present today, so physically. Some of them are remote, so if you have any questions, you can contact my colleagues directly. So we also have a list of observers. Some of them are also here today to discuss with us. And I would like to give you a short overview about the governance of the joint undertaking, EuroHPC joint undertaking, that you understand or can understand the role of our Infrastructure Advisory Group a bit better. So the major decision board, the overall decision board of the joint undertaking is a so-called governing board. And it has how many members? 30 members. One is the Commission and 29 participating states represented by representatives of the ministries. And they decide on all activities of the joint undertaking. And it's interesting to understand also the decision rules. The Commission has 50% voting rights and the other participating states equally. But you have to have a simple majority of all participating states. So you need at least 75, or it's a bit more with 29 members. You have to have 75% of the votes to get a positive vote on different decisions. And the joint undertaking, they are collecting information from interests and requirements by stakeholders. They ask scientific users and all the other people around. But they have also two official boards giving recommendations and strategic recommendations. It's called the Industry and Scientific Advisory Board, composed by the Research and Innovation Advisory Group, abbreviation is RIAC, led by Jean-Pierre Panciera, and the Infrastructure Advisory Group, called INFRAG. And the topic of the INFRAG is to discuss the overall strategy of the infrastructure aspects of the joint undertaking. Written in the regulation officially, to draw up and regularly update the draft multi-annual strategic agenda. That's the overall document the group is producing. And the focus of today's work is the next program from 21 to 27. So we should give recommendations for this time period. And the major topic at the beginning was the acquisition of the petascale and pre-exascale supercomputers. Maybe Gustav would say something about it, about details. It's an ongoing process. The decisions are made, and now we have that was the first step. It was a specification for the selection of the hosting entities, acquisition infrastructure, identification of the needed capacity, but I think this is done because the procurement processes of this phase are ongoing. So what we are discussing in the INFRAG is a more strategic view on the infrastructure, and some that we say it's more than just buying machines, procuring machines, it's about services. Oh, sorry. services, and other topics. And one of the important things is if the machines are now available next year, the first one, the petascale machines, and afterwards, a year later, the pre-exascale machines, we have to discuss and think about the access. How do we organize the access to these resources in Europe? And that's a major topic of today's event, to discuss the access policy. We set up the process top-down, starting with the requirements of the users. So we have scientific users, we have industrial users, and there's a large overlap because we have also combined projects of science and industry. And we're trying to develop a roadmap for each of these different activities, 1 to 7 and 15 years. It's based on the framework's duration, and to have a summary of the definition of the requirements, to dedicate and formulate recommendations for system architecture, software application, user support and training, and also the access. Today's focus, and I would like to motivate you a bit, we want to present the state of play of the infrac, especially the access policy discussions. So it will be done by Sergi, leading the work group on access policy. We would like to have an open discussion and feedback of you, so be critical and say we're missing something, or you agree, or you have some additional comments on it. The objective is to provide a recommendation before end of November 2019. That's due to the time constraints of the joint undertaking. Especially, we have to have an idea for the new upcoming machines, the petascale machines and the pre-exascale machines, but we also have to have an idea for giving input to the next framework program. And I think they start, Gustav, in end of November. You have to have this information. This deadline is set to allow users to access the systems as soon as they become available. Maybe Sergi will say something about the details of the different machines. 50% of the pre-exascale machines have to be given to Europe under the governing rules of the joint undertaking. And I guess 35% of the petascale machines are on a European level. Last words from my side, really simple questions. Is your area of research and expertise supported and eligible? So we have an intensive discussion of the requirements of the different communities might be different. So astrophysics might have other requirements than climate, or also the industry users have totally different requirements. So please check if we took all of the ideas and the interest into account. And then think about the process. Are you sure that you will be able to receive resources from the new EuroHPC systems? It's just a question concerning the process. Do you think what we provide or what we propose is relevant and it's feasible? And then we are very simple question. Do you think as a user you are prepared for the application process? Do you think, so if I'm thinking about the proposal I have to write, is the process we're designing, is it okay? Is it feasible? Does it make sense? Or is it just overloaded or things like that? That's all for the day. And then I would like to hand over to Gustav, if you don't have any questions. So I think we should collect all questions concerning the content until the end of the presentation of Sergi, and then we have the roundtable, and we will take all questions into account. Then I would like to hand over to Gustav. Thank you very much.
Good morning to everyone. It's for me a pleasure to be here today to give you an insight of where we stand with the implementation of the activities of the joint undertaking. I'm quite happy that we got the support of press to organize this event. HPC Geek, sorry, my mistake. With the support of everyone for a very timely discussion, as I hope you will understand by the end of my talk. Now, I will not go into too many details about all the activities that the joint undertaking is doing, but I would like to focus more on the infrastructure side, which is of highest relevance to the workshop today. So first of all, we have been advancing at neck-breaking speed since October last year, when the joint undertaking was officially and legally created. Since then, we have made huge progress, even if We still don't have our own building. We are now recruiting staff one by one. I mean, the whole logistics is an activity which is ongoing, but for the moment we are quite happy that we have the support of the Commission to implement the actions. However, as we are pressed by the timeline, we have not waited that the office is in place, that the whole team is recruited, but the actions started immediately in October last year, and now we are almost day to day 1 year later. What we have achieved so far on the actions, remember there are two big strands of activities of the joint undertaking. One is related to the research and innovation agenda, and the other one is related to the infrastructure activities. Now, both are equal in importance and go together. The research innovation agenda is there to help us build the whole HPC ecosystem. It might not have an immediate impact on any acquisition of the machines we are doing now, but there we're doing all necessary development and research activities that are necessary to build a full HPC ecosystem, which would lead, for example, in 2022, in that whereabouts, on the acquisition of the exascale machines, where we count on having a maximum of European technology developments included. We need to have the applications ready. The user communities have to be involved to adapt their codes, the algorithms. We have a number of accompanying measures to really support and provide the users with all services and access to the infrastructure, be it the centers of excellence or now the national competence centers that we will start. So if you look into the research agenda, you will see that there are quite a variety of activities that are milestones that we need in order to build this HPC ecosystem. The first call ever from the joint undertaking was published this July. The closing date of part of the call in November, mainly the competence centers and the support to SMEs. The research and innovation actions will close in January. For us and for the exercise of today of highest importance or most interest is the activities on the competence centers, which we hope to start in spring next year. I mean, call closing November. By the time we have signed the grants activity start, we are somewhere in spring next year. From what I gather, the community is already quite active in working on the concept and the proposal. But here, the idea on the competence centers, to make a long story short, is to provide local support, local access to a variety of users to be able to enter into the whole HPC ecosystem, to get access to the computers that the joint undertaking would be operating together with a number of countries, get access to all sorts of data services, help them adapting their codes, finding business case, and so on. So there you see we're already planning that by spring next year we'll have a concrete, I wouldn't call it infrastructure, but service provisioning through the competence centers, where questions will be asked like, how can I get access to the whole ecosystem? How can I access the services that are provided? How can I get access to the infrastructure? Be it small SMEs that have not traditionally participated, be it scientific user communities, or be it public organization or even policymakers that are interested or looking towards high-performance computing to solving a variety of problems, including improving their business case. On the other side, we have all infrastructure activities, which Klaus-Axel Müller rightfully pointed out in his speech. The first milestone there was in June in the selection of the hosting entities, where 8 sites were selected to host one of the 8 supercomputers that the joint undertaking will acquire together with the participating states. We have the front-end machines, the 3 pre-exascale supercomputers, and then the 5 petascale computers that would be there to broaden the availability of the computing capacity and raise the computing level in a number of regions in Europe. Now, this was the first milestone, the selection of the hosting entities, but as such did not yet lead to any acquisition of any machine. However, we haven't been idle since June. We have been very intensively negotiating with the 8 hosting entities to agree on the hosting terms. So basically, the joint undertaking will be owner or co-owner of those machines, but will not operate it themselves. They will not be in its own facilities, but the operation is delegated or transferred to a well-established supercomputing center. And what we have been negotiating now was what are the contractual conditions of this partnership of a computer center operating the machine on behalf of its participating states and of the joint undertaking. We've also been agreeing on the budget. Maybe the most interesting discussion is always the budget, but we have also closed this discussion, and we're now in the final adoption process of those legal documents that need to be signed before we can actually launch the procurement process. So we count on closing this process still this week, have the signatures of all necessary legal documents with the hosting entities and joint undertaking in the next 2 or 3 weeks, which would also include the publication of a number of call for tenders. I will not disclose here today which machine will be published or which call will be published at what day. I mean, this is still to be fixed, but for a number of machines, this is imminent, notably for the pre-exascale and for a couple of the petascale centers. The procurement of the pre-exascale will take us a bit more time. So we expect, we count that by the end of 2020, the machines should be installed, hopefully tested, so that at the latest on 1st January 2021, they could start their service. Here the process is expected to take a bit longer for a good reason. Mainly, we are trying here to buy machines on the most innovative technology, which is not necessarily yet on the market, or some new generation is coming out. So there we will take more time to negotiate also with the potential vendors. We're using the competitive dialogue here to have at the end the best available technology, the most advanced machines, which an installation that should start around summer next year. The petascale machines on their side are, I wouldn't call them off-the-shelf machines, but based more on mature technologies. That's why here we expect the procurements to be shorter and faster. For 3 of the 5, this will be done by the participating state or the hosting entity itself. For 2 of the sites, it will be the joint undertaking. And for the 3 first ones, as for the others, we expect that the installation is completed by summer next time. So you see that around summer, I don't know, June, July, depends a bit on the site, we should have at least 3, if not 5, petascale machines that are operational, that are there, I wouldn't say at the disposal, but available for any user in the European Union and associated countries to run a number of applications. And that's where for us now, I would say time also on the very practical side becomes pressing, and that's why we have the workshop here today. As all the 8 supercomputers are shared ownership. For the pre-exascale, 50% of the access time will be dedicated to the joint undertaking, while 50% to the participant states that are co-funding. On the petascale, the proportions are a bit different. 35% of the access time will be dedicated to the joint undertaking, and the 65 remaining to the participating state that is putting money or hosting the machine. Therefore, in summer next year, we must have very clear process. How do we provide access to the users? We have very good experience with what Praise is doing, and that's why we are also in negotiation in parallel with Praise on seeing what services or how could we benefit from their experience in providing access. However, keep in mind that the Praise model is only applicable to a certain extent, because here we have a much wider user community. We have the, let's say, traditional scientific or academic users from whatever scientific domain they're coming, selection based on excellence. I mean, we don't expect a big change here. However, the joint undertaking will also allow access to industrial users, not only for fundamental research, but also for commercial services, even if this will only be like 20% of the total time for legal reasons. We have here already two different types of users that have different requirements that we could not necessarily evaluate on the same basis, because, I mean, a big company has a different use than a climatologist. So just comparing excellence, we fear that at the end we'd have a disparity on providing access. We also have a number of strategic initiatives running, like the competence centers, the centers of excellence, where we also must ensure that they get a fair access one way or the other. Deliberately, the legislator, when adopting the EuroHPC regulation, did not upfront put strict rules of how to provide access to which type of user or which proportion. It has put there two key conditions. The first one is the governing board of the joint undertaking adopts the access policy that the hosting sites have to implement. And that's where we count so much on you to come up with a good scheme, how to provide access, on what conditions, to the different type of users that had very different criteria. The second point that is anchored in the regulation is that in case there is a discrepancy or certain users are not getting the access that they should get or are entitled to, the governing board can decide, okay, now we go out the normal process and we dedicate certain portion of the time to this type of user. Could be a certain user community, could be a certain region, a certain country, just to make sure that everyone gets a fair share of his access. Those questions, as I hope you see by now, are getting, I wouldn't say critical, but timely. And we have included in the next meeting of the governing board, middle of November, a discussion point on providing access and starting with providing access to industrial users on commercial purposes. So this is where we stand for the moment with the joint undertaking. Let me just summarize the infrastructure activities. We are about to launch the calls for tender for acquiring the 8 supercomputers, and we're already thinking about the next steps, which is how to provide the access to the machines once they're in service, which happens, I hope, in the next 6 months. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Gustav. If you need, we're quite deep in the details of the infrastructure advisory group and the access policy. So if you need or you want to have some further information about the EuroHPC, there's quite a good web page, the EuroHPC web page, and all of the documents are located there. Also the minutes of all meetings and so forth. So you get a lot of information if you need further information about the EuroHPC joint undertaking. Now, let's dive deep into the topic of the access policy. And I would like to ask Sergi to start the presentation. And I think we have roughly, that was he's looking at, roughly 30 participants remotely, connected remote.
So thank you very much, Axel, Gustav. So the concept is clear. So we will be having shortly some machines owned by the EuroHPC with access time, and we need to give advice to them on how we better recommend them to grant access to the different users and communities. So this is the logic. So Gustav has explained to us. In short, we will be having pexascale and petascale systems with capacities. We need to prepare the calls. To prepare the calls, we need to guarantee that these calls are fulfilling some requirements, and we need to open these calls possibly, if the systems are available in June, July, immediately in January. Okay, because it will require publications, evaluation, and access. For this reason, the InfraG has created a working group to prepare on these recommendations. So the decision of this working group, the first we established, is a composition of 6 members of the InfraG, external experts from different communities, different environments that are capable to give some diversity on the group and can give adequate inputs to be included and shared, including user communities, industry, etc. So the objective we have fixed in our calendar is to provide recommendations before end November to permit this adequate timeline for approval of the governing board. The working group, it's an internal group that we are analyzing the different opportunities, and we are organizing this open day for public consultation of the findings that this working group has identified. Okay? So you see, this is today an open event. We are on the broadcast with more than 30 participants, so it's good presentation, so people had the opportunity to get the participation. After these inputs received today, the InfraG will work on the final recommendations for presentations at the governing board. I presume if there are significant discrepancies on the outcomes, we may be having public consultation on specific topics. But my perception today on the working group outcomes is that we will be able to find a clear path to follow in the short term. So this is for your information, the composition of the working group. On the left-hand side, you have the members of the InfraG with their affiliations, and on the right-hand side, you have the members which are not from the InfraG but are having different representations. So you see large communities like Eurofusion, a private company, a commercial company like Farmacelera, university, industrial association on codes and AFEMs, representation of a scientific case from PRAISE, representation from CERN, representation from artificial intelligence, representation for PRAISE, representation from a hosting member PRAISE, representation for a community on the climate change, representation from ESA, and representations from user community. If I'm not wrong, this is fluid dynamics, if I'm not wrong. Huh? So, of course, not everybody's here, not everybody's on the list, but we have to get a sizable working group, okay? We have been establishing the working group finalized in mid-September. So today, a month after, we are able to deliver some results and information to you. So I want to thank all these people for being supportive and committed to the work on this group. So access policy for open R&D. This is what this recommendation will be based on. So this is not focused on giving recommendations on the access to industry for commercial purposes. So as Gustav indicated, there will be this recommendation, but coming from a different track. Because at this point of time, we are not sure, we didn't receive from the governing board if they want to receive a specific input on this, because there may be a different analysis on how to grant access to industry, because it's for commercial purposes and it's paid for use. So it's for open R&D, for academia and industry, the same, free at the point of usage. But what is considered as important is that the users are aware of the cost of the resources and the services they are awarded. Okay, so it's important that we are indicating this. Another general comment that we observe in this working group is that it's important to align the complete European HPC ecosystem. So this access policy should not be only focused on the international systems, but also on the national systems, on the tier 1 and tier 2, just to make sure that we have an easy movement from the national facilities or from the regional facilities to the international ones, to avoid that we are not able to have a user jumping from a national system to international system because the gap is too big. So the recommendation will be for the governing board to talk with the different member states to align adequately the policies in every country. Then we are analyzing specific groups, okay? One of these specific groups for special access is the urgent computing, okay? So the importance of urgent computing is the definition, okay? So it's only for emergency and crisis management. So it's considered that an international system at the European level should have some resources available for the public administration to analyze crises, like floods, earthquake, pollution, and spread of diseases. Okay? So in any case, this is not for an own definition of what is urgent computing. We have to define and identify the protocols for every one of these cases. The applications should be ready and prepared for execution in case of emergency. And they should be tested and assessed regularly. So it's not a matter that the emergency occurs and then they need to get access. So it has to be prepared well in a schedule. And there should be an automatic triggering of the emergency. Okay? Considerations. Of course, this is emergency, so that will be preemptive computing. So it will remove the current executions of the system. Users, those that are affected by this, will be rewarded in future with more time. So there will be no effect for them that a delay on the access of the resources they have. We are expecting that this window of execution is short. It will not be a long duration because the emergency will be finalized rapidly. In any case, we are recommending that for these cases, periodically a scientific and technical review is required to assess that these codes and this data is prepared for the execution. And finally, this access should be limited to those defined by governments or public administrations that are having the delegations of the governments. So this is clearly not a case for scientists, not a case for industry. It's a case of a group of people that is going through some government or some public administrations and defining, in case of this emergency, we have a mechanism that can help you on finding solutions and to find how to clear rapidly the problem. And this will be approved by some body, possibly the governing board, for granting the access. The access will mean that they will have continuous access to the systems for preparing the executions. And in case of emergency, they will be able to launch it. Another special access group is the strategic projects. We decided to start in this order instead of going in the order of general access, because that will be excluding, okay? For a long while, a number of communities, and for example, this is the reason we have a number of communities in the composition of the working group, have requested that they need a special access for the systems, for the HPC tier 0 systems. And so we agree, but that's a decision of the governments. As Gustav indicated, it may be the case that it is required to define specific access to specific projects. Okay? Here, a possible definition is a group of researchers with a long-term project, so long-term project that requires guaranteed access to compute resources. So it's long-term and guaranteed access. So the governing board should establish the rules to identify and select the strategic projects and fix the resources awarded to them. So anybody is thinking on why my project can be or not strategic. Okay, so for me, the definition should be simpler. Okay, because it stays on the international and European agreements and obligations. So, if we are having ITER, and we are having a contribution to ITER, and we have to guarantee resources for HPC to ITER, this is for me a strategic project. But it has to be approved by the governing board of EuroHPC, because it has to be accounted as contribution to the ITER project. The same to CERN, the same to the climate change. So, but it has to be a political agreement on this is a community, and the objective of the community is to fulfill these objectives that Europe has or the different countries are having with a specific objective. It's not a matter of a group of scientists defining their own interests. If they are good enough to make the case to the governing boards, then it should be. Any case, the running projects on this category should be also peer-reviewed, not for granting access, but for guaranteeing the quality of the job they are delivering, to guarantee that the science they are performing is adequate at this level. Now we are getting to the topics on a specific evaluation criteria. We are proposing that we should differentiate two tracks for the evaluations, one for science and one for industry, because the objectives are not always aligned. Okay? We've got requests to clarify that we need to have a clear identification of cooperation between industry and academia. And the reason is because on these cooperations, that it's of the interest of the EuroHPC to highlight, because it's for the creation of innovation, we need to avoid that we have a double window for some of the academia, that from one day they apply as industry and the other day they apply as academia. It has to be clearly identified when it's industry and when it's academia. For science, it's clearly supported that the evaluation criteria, the major criteria should be the academic excellence. Okay? But the academic excellence should not be excluding the solving of scientific puzzles that they don't require the specific innovation or breakthroughs. So there are some problems that they are not very significant, but they need and they require specific access continuously to solve those problems. They should not be avoided because they are just continuing doing the science that it's required for solving this problem. So not only limited to breakthroughs. It's recommendation also to have that all disciplines of science are competing for the same resources with no different quotas between different areas. So it should be then necessary to identify the criteria for excellence in the different domains to have this kind of distribution between areas, to guarantee that it's the same 7 publications on Nature than having 7 publications on a conference. Okay, so the excellence, we are recommending that there is a committee that is identifying the proper level of excellence at any point of time. When we are talking resources, and this will come later, it's not only talking about compute resources or the storage, but it's also about support and other resources that are necessary to perform the work. Okay, so it's necessary that on the evaluation criteria this is considered and specified, because it's necessary to enable all the teams and the scientific domains to achieve the scientific excellence. For industry, the topic will be on innovation. Okay, it's not on the slide, but it's on innovation. And it excludes specifically any commercial use. Okay, so we know it may be difficult to have this exclusion, but it's necessary to grant the access for open R&D with adequate publications. And this will come later on how to present the result of the performed work using the allocations. In both cases, on the evaluation criteria, the codes or the applications should be technological, feasible, and ready for executions. okay? But this should not be excluding any kind of execution. So both capacity and capability should be included, okay? Capacity for using the most of the single system in a single execution, or capability for using the system with different executions for solving a specific problem. And the technical requirements should not be exclusive or very limiting in a way that one should identify the balance between you need to improve your application for better performance instead of the time you need to perform this work. So we need to find the adequate balance on the axis. And the last one for the evaluation criteria is the data management plan. It's considered that the data management plan it should be required, including the description of the embargo period, when the data input output is available. If code is possibly available, then even better, but it's necessary to indicate that the data that is coming from the academic research and from the industrial research is public, and this will guarantee that this is open R&D. Okay? On the evaluation method, the analysis of the working group was really easy. So it's considered that the anonymous peer review should be the case, okay? With a speciality in different disciplines. So it's required that the reviewers are sitting on different disciplines and with the given specializations. But of course, it's also necessary to have a review committee, which is public, which is non-anonymous, but they have open discussions, but this discussion is anonymous. So they are open to have clear discussions, but these discussions are private to the committee. Okay? Of course, this review committee should be having the adequate coverage of academia and industry, respectively, okay? Because it should be able to merge different scientific domains and different industrial domains. In this case, recommendation or indications is that we should benefit from the positive experience of the Praise Access Committee and the Praise administrative support on the peer review. Okay, so we should not be reinventing another method for a method that's been working so far. Very good. For the type and duration of access, you can have as many as you want. But this group, I think we've been trying to set a high grouping of different types of access, and then leaving the implementation for later and giving enough freedom to allow specificalities, okay? So I think that we are having a total of 3 types of access, so it's 2 slides. It's standard access, benchmarking access, and preparatory access, okay? Any of other access that one can think can be included in these categories if the typology is adequately included. Standard access for in science, calls every 2 to 8 months. So we have here a discussion. So Praise is using 6 months. Some people consider that 8 months is better because this will be allowing a more adequate peer review, okay? We need to still discuss a bit on this. What is clear is that the multi-year access with guaranteed resources is required, okay? So not only guaranteeing resources for a year, but for the years to come, okay? For industry, we have also discussions that is not clear here. On one side, we have indications on people willing to have a call every 4 months because they consider the industry wants to have quick access. And on the other side, the recommendation that they should be synchronized with science calls, because that's for creating synergy for innovation calls, okay? So we're still to clear this point. So today is a good occasion for clearing this. Benchmarking access is the access for collecting the technical data that is required for the standard access, no more, okay? So the call should be always open with limited resources, normally for 2 months access, with a technical review of the benchmark plan, and with some support of the user support of the technical center providing the access. Okay, you can see we can indicate number of restrictions here, but I think it's better that we're leaving this open. Okay, is this requesting a scientific review? We didn't talk about it, but maybe it's not important to talk about it. Okay, because it's just for doing some analysis. So how much resources? No, we didn't talk about it because some users need to have a run of 10,000 cores. They need a number of resources, and others need very small resources. So we prefer to leave the freedom on the implementation to have a specific parameters. And the preparatory access is the last one, which is including a number of different access or users performing application enabling on the system. So this will be including code development, porting of applications, enabling to new hardware and software, scaling, performance improvement. So all the others are fitting here. Okay. This is applicable to centers of excellence, urgent computing for the preparation phase they have, for new communities or groups that they want to get access to the systems to test, to identify whether this is adequate to them. So they are not performing any science, they are not performing any innovation for open and with industry. It's just for testing whether this will be available to them. Here I'm missing a call open continuously. Okay, so that was missing. The idea is this preparatory access is having limited resources, but enabling real executions. So not just executing mini benchmarks, but complete execution. The duration access is from 2 months to 1 year, extendable. Okay, number of people needs only 2 months. Centers of excellence, competence centers, trainings may need longer duration. So we leave the capacity for proper definition. Of course, this requires a technical and scientific review because you are performing already some science, but at a different level. So not necessarily at the strong level of the standard access. And it's necessary to have technical and user support on the utilization of the systems. Okay, with this, we covered all the 3 kinds of access. This is preparatory access, benchmarking, and normal access. Now for resources, one has to define which resources one need to have. Is compute, memory, storage, and data transfer, and others possibly. Some of them should be included in the data management plan. Okay, but it's not limited to this, but also to the resources on the user support group. For allocation conditions on these resources, we may have large, small allocations and interactive computing. So large allocations is normally for applicable to standard access. So it's necessary to define exactly which resources are used. And in most cases, it will be possible to have a uniform utilization of the resources among the period. Okay? Normally. For small allocations, that they should also be possible, that are applicable to any access time. Okay? Not only for standard access, but benchmarking and preparatory. It is necessary that they have access to resources. So the user can use these resources at any point of time they have interest. So that the access to the queue system, if there is a queue system, it should be easy for them to use the quota at any point of time. Saying this, it will be necessary to identify how much resources you can devote to these small allocations, because it will be difficult for a compute center to guarantee the complete utilization of the system if users can have access to the systems on the time they are interested on. Okay? But the recommendation to the EuroHPC is that it's better to have this access than only having batch access to the systems. And last but not least is interactive computing access, okay, allocations. It's considered that it should be applicable to any access type, but it should be also with limited amount of resources, okay? Because it's having high impact on the full performance of the HP system, but it's also having a high impact on the science you can perform, because the users needs to interact with the simulations. They need to interact with the data at any point of time, and they need to have access interactively to the different systems. We have open questions here, and we want to hear from you, your opinion, okay? On the limits of allocations. We are not presenting any limit, but it was the case that is important to know. Should we fix a maximum percentage for a single project on a given call of the available resources? It's adequate for the science or for the industry that a single project on a call is getting 100% of one of the pre-exascale systems? I think it is. If the project is good enough and is highly ranked, it should. But some other people consider it's not. So we should identify and define at the very beginning what is the objective. Because the people that is willing to submit a call, a project with a high number of resources, need to be aware of their capacities, okay? Is there a lower limit for the EuroHPC systems to award? My opinion, it should be not. Or it should be if this is properly aligned with the capacities of the different countries in the EuroHPC undertaking, joint undertaking. So these are for me questions that we need to get the opinion of the different people and identify what is the opportunities for the recommendations we are sending to the governing board. Because the feeling is that we should be submitting these recommendations to a governing board. We shouldn't keep them free for the implementation. Couple more slides. Obligations of the awarded users. Of course, citations in papers, presentations, conference, etc. Ready to accept invitations to conferences organized by the European HPC ecosystem, EuroHPC Summit Week, trainings, centers of excellence, competence centers, okay? Datasets should be available after the embargo period. It is interesting to have a follow-up of the outcome of the project. So normally the project is lasting information on discoveries 3-4 years after the access time, but it's necessary. But of course, what is a minimum requirement is that we need to have a white paper as the outcome of the project at the end of the execution. These are recommendations that they create obligations on the contractual matters of the access policy. Because if the user is having the obligation or is ready to accept invitations, he should commit on this. And there should be a fallback when they are not fulfilling this, okay? So those are the recommendations on the obligations for the awarded users. And finally, on KPIs and access policies, for science, publications, citations, data downloads, so EuroHPC should be including these KPIs on the list. And of course, specific targets should be for specific communities. For industry, the same, publications, citations, but then here, patents, IP protected, so we need to identify. It's also important that the new communities are included in the EuroHPC usage, okay? And then indicators should be included on this matter, okay? So with this, I'm concluding the presentation, and then we open the discussion for the floor for discussion. You're leading.
Okay. Thank you, Sergi. presenting the work. So the floor is now open for questions, discussions. And we would like to start the discussion of the different ideas and the different things we discussed within the working group. Are there? Daniel.
Theoretic. So I have first, perhaps I would like that Sergey give a recall. What do you mean by benchmarking access? I think for me it was not very clear. So can you give in detail what it is? My second question was about training. Do you have, or perhaps it's a part of the list, but I didn't notice it. Do you have special access for training? For instance, when Competence Center will organize some teaching, some training, do we have special access, full access for the students of the training?
Sergey, it's up to you.
Thank you, Daniel. On the benchmarking access, the indication I was giving is that this should be specialized on gathering the necessary information for applying for a standard access. So this is meaning you have your code prepared in a different machine, you have your data on a different machine, and you want to understand the performance of the processor, the networking, the file system for your real execution, because this is data that we are expecting that is required for the evaluation process. And this is the only objective. So perform some executions to test the performance of that system with your application and with your data. Okay. For the training, we were considering that this should be fitting on the preparatory access. So we are understanding that the centers of excellence will be having access to these capacities, and then they should be able to grant access for the trainings adequately. So we don't want to indicate a specific access for training because it will create a lot of variety, but for me, this should be included here.
Hi. Hi.
Okay, you use the next one. Second, please. Yes, you start and then.
So I got a question on the long-term access. How you're going to define the long-term access? I mean, is some project that have a lifetime during the whole EuroHPC time frame, or it's something that is going to be even beyond?
Can you please indicate your name so for people?
My name is Goar Sanchez. I'm from iCheck.
Okay. So the question was that.
So usually projects are for a couple of years or a year, but you define that you're going to have a special access for projects that need a long-term or continuous access. So how are you going to define that long-term access? Is it going to be something during the whole lifetime of EuroHPC, or is something like going to be like 3 years time? How are you going to define it?
So we have to differentiate between the standard access and the strategic projects. I don't know if the question is going in this direction.
For a strategic project.
Okay. If it's for strategic projects, I think we are giving the recommendation to the governing board that they should clearly identify whether they want to have or not strategic projects. Then, if this is the case, they should identify which amount of resources they are granting to this and for how long. It should be not a decision on the peer review, but on the governing board. And the duration, for me, it's a decision on the governing board. They are the owners of resources, and if they have a compromise on a strategic project that is lasting for 10 years, if they think they can grant the access for 10 years, they should. I don't think they can, because they don't have systems for 10 years. Okay, so they should find the level. We are not indicating any specific.
Okay, thank you.
Pete?
So I noticed in the Vid Vondrak, IT for Innovations, Czech Republic. So I noticed in the obligations that there is also for the industrial users publications, presentations, citations, and so on. I don't think that actually they care too much about those things. So I think that's a little bit problem. If we would like to digitalize the industry, then we have to focus on their really needs. So that's not usually presentation. That's the same also about the peer review process, because I think the peer review process should be focused more on the innovations potential of the companies than rather on the scientific excellence and so on. So that probably it should be another pool of peer reviewers or something like that. So then that my let's say input regarding the industrial partners. Yeah.
Thank you, Britt. But in fact, for the evaluation method for industry, we are proposing to have a different track, and this second track is more fixed on the innovations. Okay, so it's not. We are creating some noise here. So it's based on the innovation. Okay, and of course on the obligations from industry, we will be including any of the possibilities. Okay, but it's difficult to measure, and in the short term, at the end, it's cooperation between industry and academia, and academia is interested also on doing these publications and information. But of course, we will be including these digitalization capacities of the industry.
Maybe some additional comment on this, because we have a lot of experience with supporting industry based on open R&D. So this has to be aligned somehow, but we have less experience with the really commercial activities within our centers due to the restrictions of the funding, because we are not allowed at the moment or not focused on selling cycles and doing commercial business. It's mainly a scientific oriented approach. So if we talk about industry, it's mainly open R&D in industry. And then we have a second track. We have to discuss about commercial usage of the resources. One additional comment to the long-term access. So if we discuss its long-term access, strategic projects, community access, at the end it means we want to define a quota of computing time dedicated to a certain community, a certain project, or so forth. But it might be difficult even running the system, because if you say, if the governing board says, yes, that's a very important topic like climate research, we want to have 10 years support of 20% of the resources of the machine, then this quota is blocked. And for the other processes and the other communities, we have only 80% of the computing time, even if the climate community is not using their 20%. So, and then we have a discussion at the end. There will be climate, there will be energy, there will be green efficient energy, there might be smart agriculture as strategic projects, and each gets 20%. So at the end, 80% of the computing time is blocked for 10 years and not for the others. There was a discussion within PRAISE to have this open peer review, so have a decision each year or each 6 months about the distribution of the different topics. So it's always a competition between this quota-based model and the totally open model. And this has to be defined, I think, by the governing board. They have to decide as a political decision of the funding agencies to make it open or to define quotas.
On the first stages, we will not have any strategic projects, okay? But when they are coming, we are having this problem, okay? And then we have to oppose the diversity of access and the maximization of the utilization of the systems, okay? But you can also define to have overbooking, okay? So that's also an opportunity.
Sergi, one
name, please.
Philippe Guzan, Sonairo. Quick question about the data set that you mentioned in one of the upcoming slides that you have. How far do you want to go with the availability of the data sets? Yeah, that's the one.
If you ask me, my personal opinion, as much as possible, because this is values This is outcome of the research, and you want to be able to use this in the future. Okay, and if you want to store this data for long, you have to be sure that this data is usable for anything. Okay, so the data management plan and the data set available should be available if this is necessary. If it's not good to keep, it was not good to compute. Sorry, my opinion. You asked for my opinion, huh? Sure.
Yes, I think an additional comment on this, because now we are obliged to publish results. Is it only paper, or is it the data too? Data are the results. Therefore, and even in the development we have now, data is more and more the important thing. So if we think about artificial intelligence, without data, it's only artificial. There's no intelligence. And yes, you have to have data. Data is the value we are producing. So I think it has to be published. We're on the same line, I guess. Not only writing papers. Minna?
Thanks. Comment on the data.
Your name.
So, if the data will be available after the embargo period, that also means that we have to take a stand to the storage of the data. That's number one. And then number two is that some data sets are huge. So kind of like how meaningful it is to give access to 50 terabytes, 100 terabytes, without kind of metadata and usage, how to use the data. So those are always resources from somewhere, from the computing group or somewhere else. So also those need to be decided.
Yeah, on the first one, this is a real point for these recommendations that we will be issuing to the governing board. So right now we are having resources that are not including data preservation. And then if we are recommending that the data should be available for the long term, they should find mechanisms to have these data capacities. Okay, that's required. And of course, on the second one, yes, data have to be kept at the level that is necessary to be able to reproduce and to be using. And that's the reason for including this on the peer review, on the evaluation method, because someone can indicate, yes, your science is ideal, but you don't have an idea on how to keep your data, so you don't get access, because the data will be useless in the future. So there should be a balance on.
My name is Ad Emmen Genias. I have a question. Do you consider data locality of the researcher and locality of the machine and the type of machine? For instance, if you have data moving around Europe, that can be very costly, and it can also be very energy costly. And for instance, if you have a researcher at the University of Girona, and his application or her application runs 20% faster on Lumi than on Mare Nostrum 5, it can still make sense to do it at Mare Nostrum 5 because there's local, it's more local in access and in support.
Thank you very much. So we are not giving recommendations on this direction because we are considering that this is part of the technical review. Okay, we are considering that the access should be granted to these researchers if necessary, but the better place they should identify, because it may depend on the architecture, on the data locality, or at the end of who is using later on this capacity, because the data in or data out. So we are leaving this for the final implementation and the technical review especially.
And short addition, I think in the experience we have today is that the data sets are so large that it takes a long time to transfer, except prices, energy, and also these stuff. Even with a terabit backbone, if you want to transfer 500 terabytes or even a petabyte on data, you need to start your computation. You need a week to copy the data. So normally it's difficult. So the data sets are increasing much faster than the computing resources we need, the pure computing resource we need. And it's the same aspect Minna was addressing. And it has to be coded information. So we'd have to discuss standards and how to store the data and how to manage the data for a long time. I think you're obliged to keep the data for 10 years if you do publications. So we have to discuss it. It's an additional aspect.
Stefan Rekener from Shensi. Going back to the comment of Mina, it's true that first, open data is not open R&D. Open data, the regulation is bounded to the project funded by the European Commission and the public agencies. For industrial users are not bounded perhaps to open data. So we need to take care on the scope of open data. It's true that it needs to be applied where it needs to be applied. As you said, it's a plus if the data can be shared, but it not has to be a must. Otherwise, even with open R&D, you are going to lose some potential users. The second one is also related to the duration of the long-term archive. It's a new business here, which is not used, for example, not performed by Praise.
No, sorry, Stefan, I didn't get your second question because I'm worried about this interference we're having here. I have no telephone with me, so I am...
All bio.
Okay.
Don't move, Sergio.
So, Stefan, the first questions were related, yes, we need to identify. So, yeah, it's open R&D, so the industry has to fulfill the obligations on open R&D, and we are giving recommendation that this should be also including open data. Okay.
So my second comment was on the line of what the one of Mina. It's a real business to archive and to make available data. I'm not so sure that EuroHPC is ready on the hosting entities to fund these necessary services. So if then don't take care, do not promise the moon to the communities. So it's really a big business to make available during 10 years petabytes of data with all the metadata and all the services. And if it's a case, which is good, we need to put the money somewhere and to plan to do this service.
Yes.
And my final comment is coming to artificial intelligence. So we had during the working group this discussion. I don't know how far the GU wants to go with AI. Only AI working with science, or people developing AI frameworks, or people doing AI for something different. It's true that we are going to deploy converged services, and it's really important not to forget the needs of AI. We have to be converged.
Thank you, Stefan, for this late one. I want to ask the others, what's your opinion on AI? Because he was coming to the group and indicating that AI may need a different kind of access without a scientific review because they don't know if they will succeed. And yeah, I can understand. And my question was, if they know what they are doing and they are just, let's do. No, they should have a case for, and that should be available for a scientific review anyhow. What's your opinion?
Sergio, first, you are making a shortcut for my position. I said sometimes, in most of the time, it will be peer-reviewed, but sometimes, for example, people developing frameworks, they don't know, they are not able 6 months in advance to write a paper indicating what they are going to do. They're working much more in the try-error mode, adapting the frameworks, developing, choosing the by parameter. It's not so easy for them. If we want to attract these people, which is a big, important community in Europe, at least in France, we need to be more elastic and more open. And I think the recommendation you did regarding the dynamic or elastic access for the preparatory access is a good one. But don't, I said, I agree, they need also to have a scientific peer review.
But it will bring the discussion down. We had the discussion already about community access and the different weighting of the communities. So today, if we compare it to the praise process, they decided to have not a community-specific weighting of projects. But we should think about, so then we have a discussion between physicists, AI, and all the others communities. We should think about, and you might give us a recommendation, we would give then to the governing board, because it's some sort of decision of the funding agencies to focus on specific topics that might also be different for different countries of the governing board members. So should we be open totally, compare all proposals at the same time on the same level based on scientific excellence, or should we focus and structure it based on community interests and community criteria? Then we can have a discussion to, okay, we compare all physics physics proposals, and we compare all artificial intelligence proposals. And we take the best out of the list and then say each community has 2 proposals to be awarded, or should it be open? Then you can address this aspect of the AI community and saying, okay, we have 10 AI proposals, and you can wait and compare these based on scientific excellence within their group and say, okay, there's one high shot proposal for number 1, and this should be taken into account. Otherwise, we had a long discussion the last 10 years within the access process of praise, and they decided to have it open for everybody to compare all of them at the same level. What do you think, Mark?
Sorry, Mark Bart from France here. Just to comment on this point, I think there's a slight difference in the way that I think Stefan's argument was that the IA community right now is not a typical HPC user. And I think the question was, what efforts do you want to make for communities that are not yet used to HPC to get them on these systems? It's a slightly different point, I think, than the equilibrium between the well-known communities, physics and so on, that already use it.
I think Sergi addressed it a bit. So we have different levels and different levels of projects and support. So if they are not really used to use HPC machines, and they're not really using the high performance of these machines, so they should start with these supporting projects, like a preparatory access with training and so forth. And on the other hand, my personal opinion is AI is a tool, is a method. We're not talking about applications. So there might be AI applications in physics and engineering, and so combined to classical simulation. And I hope that in a few years, we will understand that AI is a method based on data analytics, just having a new tool for the classical applications. And then it's different. Then we talk about applications and communities, and not about AI alone anymore.
So I think that for EuroHPC it's very important to be prepared for having new communities. Instead, they are interested to have new communities of any kind of domain. So we should find the mechanisms to give recommendations that are inclusive, okay, that are permitting. And that's the reason we were trying to keep at the high level definition on the different kinds of access, okay? So that's the reason on the preparatory access, anything should be possible to be incorporated. But also on the standard access, where a user can request to have 10% of the total capacity of the system for 3 years, or a user can request to have only 1% of a system on a month. So we should be able to make recommendations at any level to allow this, okay? Because the EuroHPC needs to have all the communities included within the usage of these systems.
Norbert Meyer.
Norbert Meyer, Poznań Supercomputing Networking Center. I have a comment and a question. So far, when we are talking about the commercial access to the infrastructure, HPC machine, yeah, it was said up to 20% of resources. On the other side, if we will not define any criteria, yeah, because the major criterion is to pay for it, yeah. I wonder if the resources which will be reserved for commercial purpose, yeah, will somehow interfere with the R&D resources, yeah, because in some cases, if we allow the access, let's say ad hoc, yeah, or on demand, this may somehow to disturb later on the scientific grants and the access we gave it in the past, yeah, to the scientific groups. So a question is, if we make a reservation of the resources, pre-reservation for commercial use, or up to 20%, what means it will run somehow in dynamic, yeah.
Should I or you?
Thank you, Norbert. Let me just clarify one point about the commercial access. First of all, the EuroHPC has a primary scientific role. So priority should be given to any scientific application. However, we already know, since we have been discussing the whole concept of EuroHPC, that there's a strong interest also from industrial users. That's why we have included in the regulation condition that says up to 20% of the time could be used for commercial purposes. Question why 20%? I mean, this is a legal limit for any public infrastructure. The question for us is more, how do you decide when you give access for industrial users, and for any type of users where you might define a block, how do you spread it? Is this like over 1 year, over 5 years, over 1 month? Where do you define the percentages? Then don't forget, we have not only one machine, but we have the 8 machines we're going to put in service now. Then next couple of years we'll get more. It might be integrated with some national machines that the countries make voluntarily available themselves. So the question is also, how do you define, is it over each machine or is it over the total available computing capacity? So these for us are fundamental questions where I'm quite happy that you raised them here.
And you know it, Norbert, at the end, it's the resource planning for each machine. You have these numbers of industrial projects, and then you have, and that's why Sergio also addressed this question of aligning the calls, the scientific calls, and also the industrial. But it's a question of implementation of the process. And I think the more important question is what are the government restrictions? So 20% is the maximum of the resources, and then we have to define the requirements and the criteria to select industrial projects. And at the end, it's implementation. Gunnar has a question. You want to add something, or?
We have a question from there.
Okay, first Gunnar, and then we have a question from the remote user. Gunnar.
Yes, Gunnar Bo from Uninet Sigma 2. I have a question regarding the access policy, the joint undertaking one and potential national access policies, because these machines will have one part of it owned and controlled by the joint undertaking, and on some machines there was also national parts on it. So do you foresee some kind of alignment between these access policy that joint undertaking have and the national ones, for instance, on this lower resource limit that was raised?
It's good you raise the questions. Let me here clarify. We are talking only about the access time that is made available to the joint undertaking. So in the case of the pre-exascale, it will be 50% of the time. For the petascale, up to 35%. What the participating states or the consortia, the hosting entity that has the ownership of the other share of access time, how they are allocated for the national purposes is of no concern to us. It's considered their national access time, they have their national conditions, and if Spain wants to do it one way and Poland the other way on their share on the same machine, it's of no business to us.
But
He's Catalan.
But in the working group, it's considered of importance that the EuroHPC governing board is taking lead on identification on joint user access mechanisms at the European level. So you cannot govern the high-end level access systems without understanding what is in the lower level and setting out the proper synchronization between the two levels. So one of the recommendations we are planning to include for the governing board is that this dialogue for proper alignment of the user access is established. So of course, we understand that it's not possible for EuroHPC to say what will be on the partition of one of the pre-exascale systems, but indicating recommendations received from the InfraG and from the working group, we are interested on looking for this objective. Okay.
We have one question.
We have one question. If I can read. Yes, question from Muriel Pineda and BSc. When publishing papers, sometimes the reviewers request further simulations in a short period to have the paper published. Would you consider a fast track to resources for these situations? We have not considered this. I think this is coming very frequent these days, okay? And I think we should be able to find how to define this adequately on the different accesses, okay? Mina.
Thanks. I always answer to that question that no, this is not possible. Because, I mean, these referee comments are very frequent, that in order to get this published, you need this and that and that and that and that. It would be better for the scientist if there would be no more computation time because of this, because then kind of you get into this feedback loop which takes forever. So it's better to cut it somewhere and just say that no, there are no computational resources for this.
It's a very valid opinion. So if you are a good scientist, you should not be requested to perform these further simulations because all the information is clear enough. And if you need to have these further executions, you have to compete again for more cycles. No? Yeah.
Okay.
No? So
why not 10? Why not 15? Why not 20?
So not taking. We have a governance here that the InfraG will set their recommendations. But we are considering this that we have not considered. Thank you.
We will take it into account. I think maybe a compromise could be that it's also reviewed. Then we can ask for an additional tune time, but it has to be reviewed, not just extending the Sinead is shaking head. Sounds messy. Okay. Yes, you're right.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Arnau Folk from BSc, and I'm here representing a Center of Excellence. I have actually one comment and one suggestion. My comment, well, I want to congratulate with the working group for including the special case for origin computing. I think it's a really a step forward on this. There is one Center of Excellence already working on this. We are developing already workflows and so on. And I think it's very important to have this in case of emergency in Europe and beyond. My suggestion here would be to treat the urgent computing as a different case, because we are not talking about science, we are not talking about technology here, we are talking about a different thing. And for instance, for the obligations, it's a critical aspect. So I'm not sure that it's a good idea to make the results open, for instance, because it has a lot of implications, even legal. So maybe my recommendation here would be to study this case in more carefully. Okay. I'll give you an example. Let's say that we have an earthquake in Italy, and there are 2,000 deaths. Then you use a supercomputing. You run very fast ground-shaking maps for the Italian civil protection. You give the result to them. Perfect. They send the rescue teams according to the model results. They save lives. Fantastic. It's a success story. Now, what do you want to do with the results? You want to make it open? It has a lot of implications for, I don't know, for insurance. Let's say that an insurance company goes there, looks at the map, and then according to the results, does something. It has implications on, I don't know, the prices of the houses can grow up, can go down. So you know what I mean? So maybe in this particular case, it would be interesting to keep it more confidential, the results, and study more carefully. That's just a suggestion for the working group. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we had this discussion too in the group. So the definition of emergency is missing. So what does it mean in emergency computing case? So if you remember this volcano event, Eyjafjallajökull, just spreading the ash around. Yes, there was this, and they had to simulate it and to simulate the distribution of this. And I think we should take it as it's my personal opinion. We did not discuss it in the group. It should be taken like a commercial activity. It's just a special event, closed, and it's just the result should be given to the government or the one who asks for the simulations, and then it's a closed job. But it has a lot of, it's more a question of the government people. They ask us since 15, 20 years to be able, because we have the large infrastructure to run these simulations based in emergency case. But it's critical. You have to be prepared. You have to be able to switch off the whole and to change the whole system in 10 to 15 minutes to run the simulation if it's really an emergency case. And if you do an update, you have to update also software. You have to test it if it's running or not. So it's very difficult. They just say, let's have this because we have the big machines and we can do the simulations. But the process behind it, they didn't talk about it.
Now, I think that we really need to differentiate between publication of data of an emergency and publication of the capacities to react among emergencies. Okay, maybe an opportunity can be that we are restricting the publication of this special case to the publication of the capacities. So what is the software being used, what are the capacities, what you can simulate, what's the input you are expecting to receive, in which and how much time you will be able, but not providing the technical results of this, because this will be only owned by the governments or the public administrations. Okay, good.
Erwin.
Erwin Laure from KTH. A comment on the preparatory access. So I understand that now access for development purposes, like things being done by the Centers of Excellence, but also other projects that move the technology forward, is now part of this preparatory access, which I think is very good. And I like your sentence, limited resources, but enough for real executions. And I want to stress the real executions here, because that has been a concern for some in the current setup that we have from PRAISE, right, which focused on the limited part of that sentence. So we just need to make sure that there's indeed enough resources there that we can have real tests and real executions for the testing a new technology.
It was the idea, but of course, with scientific reviews, it's not an open menu.
Alfred.
Okay. Yeah, I have a question related to the governance for the commercial use. Is the intention to reinvest the money coming in from the commercial use and to expand the systems by that, or what is the regulation here?
Alfred Geiger to systems.
No, there's a very clear answer to your question. I would like to refer to the regulation establishing EuroHPC joint undertaking, that any revenue generated from the commercial access is reinvested in the activities of the joint undertaking. And here we're talking only about the commercial access granted on the EuroHPC time, not the one that might be granted by the hosting entity. So we have to provide market prices for the commercial service, and the revenue there goes back into the general budget of the joint undertaking to fund further actions on research, infrastructure, and so on.
I think that's the same for all countries. So we have to reinvent the money. If we make money with the funding, with the funded resource infrastructures, we have to spend the money again in the same activity. I think that's a principle. And it's important to understand, if we talk about industrial usage, that we have to sell the resources to market price. That's also a requirement. We are not obliged to make profit, but we have to sell the resources to market price due to competition. Ed.
Yes, so you looked at aligning European and national resources and access to that. Did you also look at aligning EuroHPC and the European Open Science Cloud?
Gustav. It's a question to the CEO of EuroHPC.
It's also about access, of course.
No, we cannot do everything at the same time. The key question here is giving access to the computing infrastructure, which we'll be installing in the next couple of months. The question about EOSC and other types of data service or infrastructures is on the horizon. will have to be addressed, but this is something that we will not be able to start implementing before 2021 or beyond. So this is a question that might come up again later, but for the moment, it's not part of the discussion.
So I presented at the beginning of my speech a bit the task of the Infrastructure Advisory Group. It was to develop or it is to develop the multi-annual strategic agenda. And what I take out of this discussion we have here is that we have not only think about the computing, but we also have to think about data and combination of data and computing and storage and management. And we should take this into account, not only for the access. Access is a bit this detailed topic of it, but it's a general discussion as it is AI, data, and compute, which is I think one topic in sum, and we should discuss this in our group, in the Infrastructure Advisory Group, for the upcoming program starting with 21 to 27, and there might be given some recommendation about the development. It's not on the political level, EOSC and EuroHPC is just based on the user requirements and the requirements of the communities we are supporting. What was the question? Remote? Sergi, some remote question?
No.
Come on. Daniel.
There is no question. Thank you very much. So Daniel Varade from Infrag. Do you have any policy for orienting the different kind of simulation to the different computers? Because, as you mentioned, there will be some benchmarking to see the performance, and probably the 8 machine will not be identical. So do you think that it should be some policy to help or to push the people to get to a computer and not to have another one for efficiency reasons?
Daniel, we are not pushing, we are motivating. No, we have the discussion also in praise, because we have different architectures within praise, and everybody, it's a bit of a different approach. So everybody is free to apply for all of the machines, but there will be a technical review. You have to show that you're able to use the machine and but it's quite open. But we should think about it, because there might be a variety of architectures, and to motivate people to have some bonus points or whatever, some benefits if they apply to a certain architecture. That might be a good idea. What do you think, Sergi?
I'm just thinking. So what we've been doing so far right now is that people is applying to any kind of machine, and if this machine is capable of running good performance on that application, it's accepted. But what we are not doing these days is considering, okay, it will be more effective on a different machine instead, and then it's shifted from the very beginning, because there are many problems on having this shift, because it's including the data transfer problem. If I'm shifting from one machine to the other, I may have a special agreements to host my data on a specific location which is close by to the other one. So normally we are we are leaving to the users to identify what is the preferred machine they want to have, or if you want to say the preferred architectures they want to have, and then a possible shift is adequate.
I have a question in this context to the audience, because we did not address it up to now in our group. What about defining the topics to be supported? It's a bit in the direction of Daniel's question. The question of Daniel is more a technical one. Should they address specific architectures? On the other hand, we had a discussion, should we focus on specific scientific topics, or should a certain call should be focused on maybe on a certain scientific topic? We had the discussion already, but it could change call by call. And how to organize this decision. It's not done by the governing board. It should be done by some scientific advisory group in the joint undertaking. How do we collect all the scientific input and the scientific requests? So we are talking about the process, about our, rules and requirements, but we are not talking about the content of the program. It's just open to everybody. Everybody is open to apply, or should we focus on should we recommend to focus on certain aspects?
I can probably comment on that. I think that this is related to flagships also, or to the new coming missions, or whatever the name they are. I think that if you want to align the whole policy for these particular strategic objectives in Europe, maybe you have to think that they have to have some kind of access.
Yes, but so it was Nuria.
So, no, I'm not. No. She's indicating if you have to, they need to have. But if you are only including the missions, then you are leaving some other areas of research that are basic research that are still valid. So for me, it's what I heard from Maria Gracia saying, those are strategic projects. So for me, that's the intention on the definition of the strategic project. So if we have a clear strategy of an emission, and emission requires this objective because we want to reduce the emission of CO2 in Europe in 27 by this industry, this needs compute time, block. We have this compute time, okay? But it should not be giving exclusive access to these people, avoiding the others can develop properly. I have two questions here.
Yes, maybe one comment, but it's a recommendation to Gustav. There's one thing missing in the joint undertaking setup. You have to set up some sort of board or group to decide on the scientific topics.
No, it's a perfect regulation. Nothing is missing. Just kidding. No. I would like to go back to the discussion we had on exactly that question with the Council, the European Council, when we were negotiating the proposal for the regulation. We have here two requirements that we have to put in balance. One is we want to be as open as possible and allow any user that has a valid ground, that has a real problem to be solved with those machines, to have everyone a chance to benefit from the machines and get access without setting any administrative or whatever entry barriers. Keep also in mind that we're investing now for the next 2 years close to 1 billion in huge infrastructure. It's a shared investment, so the countries that are co-funding it are of course quite worried that their investment also benefits their communities. That's why there was a very sensitive discussion on keep it open so that everyone can get an access. However, there was also a recognition that there are certain reasons, and you have used here the word strategic projects, to give a certain, I would say, access security to those strategic projects, whatever a strategic project means. Let me give you one example. We have a couple of centers of excellence running with a clear mission to prepare their respective user communities for the exascale area, adapting the codes, developing the software, participating in the co-designs of the machines, and so on. Now, for us, these are strategic projects because they contribute to the building of the EuroHPC ecosystem. Now, imagine you have, I don't know, let's take the AI Center of Excellence that says, now I need to test my new code to see if it runs on an exascale machine. I need to test this. It would make no sense if they have to undergo a purely excellence-based peer review and might be discarded. So that the impact is our whole agenda, our planning of implementing the HPC ecosystem fails. That's why we have in the regulation this Monday, and that's where we are counting on input, identify under which conditions and how you give access to a number of strategic projects, whatever a strategic project means. If it's predefined by running activities, if it's a big societal challenge that pops up like climate change, God knows what. The key question is how do you identify those projects and how do you grant them access, keeping everything in balance. I would also like to remind you that the hosting entities that will be running the machines, they have to report regularly on the usage that is made of those machines. The joint undertaking will regularly inform the governing board saying, okay, over this reporting period, this was the usage by type of application, type of user, country, trends. I mean, maybe one community never gets access, and the governing board might say, okay, everything is fine, or no, you have to take corrective action to redress the situation. Yeah.
Thank you, Gustav. Then our recommendation is perfectly aligned with your regulation.
The perfect regulation.
Yes.
With the perfect regulation.
Perfect regulation.
So I want to have an opinion from you on these two questions. So should we have a limit of the maximum resources on a given call for a single application? I gave you my opinion. Huh? Is someone considering that an application should not get more than 80% of a single allocation? It's okay of getting 100%? Everybody's smiling, everybody's having hands on pockets on the laptop, so everybody's happy to have a single allocation with the maximum capacity of a system. Okay.
You have to be fair. We had the discussion already. So there are two different things to take into account. The one is the size of the project, of the single project. It has to be as large as possible. On the other hand, we have to have enough resources to support more than only one project in a call. So these are the two things you have to balance. So if we have enough resources to support these super large projects, then it's okay. But it shouldn't be the case that we then only have one project and had 50 applications to be supported in Europe. So it's always to balance.
I'm talking, the question is related to one machine. I think the answer was also related to one machine.
May I? Serge Bogarts, Praise Managing Director. Another interesting question you could ask is, who would be giving a view on this? In Praise, the Access Committee is addressing this question from the scientific point of view. And they are actually reviewing the proposal with this idea: do they request a reasonable amount of resource for getting the science they claim they want to do? And so they're recommending the organization in terms, to their praise, in terms of this is too much or not enough, by the way. And are we ready actually to delegate this to a committee to make a recommendation? Of course, decision making is for another body, but to make a recommendation in terms of that. And usually scientists are also aware of, yeah, we have a certain volume of resources. Is it worth to actually devote this volume to a single project in terms of science?
Maybe we have to explain a bit the details. Everybody is allowed to use the full machine, even if it's not a large project. We just talk about computing time. So that's not a restriction to the size of the computer you can use. It's just a restriction of computing time. So that's a difference. If we talk about, do we support a single project on the whole machine? That means you will give the whole quota of 50% to one user for 1 year. So the machine is totally blocked then.
We're not talking about that. We're not talking about that. I mean, because the program, there will be several calls, there will be different ways to access the machine. So by no means you will be have just one project using the full resource of a single machine.
The question is of getting the full resources of a call.
Of a call,
okay. No, because you have
probably
the access and you have the benchmark access.
I
mean, I would not recommend EuroHPC to have just one call using up the whole resources. By no means. I mean, this would be crazy.
Okay. But that was exactly the question, and everybody was smiling and saying no. So I have a different opinion, because on the way normally the peer review is progressing and the access committee, the projects are in priority order. Okay? So the only way a project can have all the capacity of a system is in the top 5. In top 5 in Europe, asking for this capacity. And if it's considered the best one, you would not recommend to have? I would. Because I will be giving the responsibility to the access committee for making this decision. Because at the end, this is the final objective to perform science. We have a question from Gustav.
Yeah. I would like to somehow turn the question around and just see it from perspective of an entity that has to operate the infrastructure and justify to its shareholders or investors how it uses its time. So first value, giving someone access for the full machine for a limited period of time, if this is scientifically justified, it's not the issue. The issue is if this access denies for a longer period any other users to get access to a shared infrastructure. Now, for me, the very practical question is, because I have to pay the access that for you as a user will be for free. Now, we had a long discussion with the supercomputing center saying you're paying us making available the computing time. What the user does with it, you cannot charge on us. So I want now to know, how can you ensure that if I give you access full time of my machine, you're actually using it full time and not you're just blocking other users and I have to pay for this non-availability to other users. So how are you going to handle or prevent or correct those situations? My question is, if you have in mind the model that was fashionable when the internet came up, where you said you're paying for a guaranteed bandwidth of 2 megabits, but the whole system has like 20 gigabits. So if nobody else uses this, you can use it. But as soon as other users join in, I reduce your bandwidth to the minimum guaranteed contractually. So for us, it's really a question, how do you make sure that once you get the access, it's used and you're not denying other users the access?
So, sorry, maybe you already answered the question, of course. I'm not agreeing with Sergey saying. I mean, you can't, EuroHPC doesn't look like Olympics, so you can't give a gold medal to one winner and that's all. So I guess it should be something fair. So you have like 5 top project and you have, and the first one collapse or just take all the capacity of the machine, it should be like a certain percentage that it should be allowed, but not all. So probably you can put it in the rule, something like a project can take up to the 25% of machine, but because for the user's perspective, it's like you are not giving just one guy or one group the whole machine. You're trying to push all science from different domains, from different perspectives, let's say.
I'm smiling because this was exactly the question and the general concern. Okay, when you are asking scientists if for performing this work you need this amount of resources, if you are breaking in different parts, the only thing that you are is having a longer time for getting the result. Because we have to trust the scientists. I'm only trusting them. Okay, so if they submit an application indicating that for doing this discovery, I need this amount of resources on this period of time. If I double the time, I'm getting twice the time to result. And then I'm losing the competition. And yeah, the problem is the wording, okay? When you say you are blocking the system to other users. Yes. So what is the problem? If it's the best case, it's really recognized the best. We are talking about 3 petascale systems. My question is about one of these petascale systems in one call that we may foresee 2 in a year, that you have preparatory access, you can still do code development, you can do other things. It should be the case. So the problem is if in the recommendation we indicate you can only get up to 50% or 30% of the total capacity of the system, this is rule. This is a rule. If you let the freedom to the committee to decide if it's good enough, because they will have this discussion, but with the project in hand, is this very good to block? Yes, and now I use the word block, to block all this, the 4th and the 5th of the list. So that's the reason I was exactly asking. So I would prefer to have it open and to give the Access Committee the responsibility for making this decision, because it's not blocking all the European capacities, but it's just guaranteeing that Europe has a mechanism to achieve excellence.
But I should be very cautious because there are, in worst case scenario, that someone, let's assume that someone apply for a project and get the full capacity. If that project, I know that Gustav said that they will be reduced every year, but I'm aware that people apply for resources and sometimes they don't use it. So what happens if you block 100% of a capacity and that the guy goes on sabbatical and the group did nothing? So you're not only wasting our resources, I mean the full capacity of the machine for that project, but also you are, all the rest of the users that couldn't get the access are blocked. So what I'm trying to say is trying to find a good trade-off between promote good science and at the same time don't leave anyone behind.
So
everybody's motivated.
Yeah. So one thing should not be forcing me to do the other. So a user not using their capacities, okay, it's a different matter, okay? But no. In the project plan description, it should be described exactly what he's gonna do in the full year, okay? Not having any pregnancy, not having any maternity, not having any vacation, having enough people. I was not. It was not a sex and a gender balance comment, because in praise, we've got the request for extension because the project IP was on maternity leave. When she was submitting, she should know, okay? So that should know, but. It's a different matter. So if we are having to limit the capacities are granted to the user, just in case someone not, no, we have to trust the users. And we have to accommodate to make sure that the resources are always used. We have to make sure that we have always some capacity. That's also the question I was arising. Should we have overbooking? Yes. To which amount? So right now, if we can fit 10 projects, number 11 is gone. Is this a bad project? No, it was 11th. Bad luck. Should we grant them some hours? Sure. Small. But in case somebody not is using, he can use all the other. That's another possibility. And then you avoid that the other problem that someone is not fulfilling the capacities.
And then we should add some flexibility to the access committee deciding on this and to be able to reduce computing time and to talk to the researchers about the changes. Because if you know that you get the amount of computing time you ask for, then you're not thinking about it. So if you ask for 120 million core hours, and you know I've granted I will get 120 million, it's better than the experience we have on a national level to give the access committee some sort of freedom saying, okay, I will talk to the scientists if 100 instead of 120, 100 are sufficient, but then we can support and award the other project. And we should trust also the access committee to give some sort of flexibility to these people. But you're allowed to ask for the full amount of resources. And if your project is good enough, you win, and your competition is so good that you will win, we should support it. But we should also keep in mind the discussion, because 29 people are sitting around the table in the governing board, and they are seriously looking on their 50% or 35% of the quota and of the resources. And this should be equally distributed. There should be no entry barrier.
I have an additional question for you, Sergey. Coming back to try to answer your first question, do you think that you have the same approach, the same kind of problem, if you are speaking about capacity or capability? Do you think that the answer is the same?
To me personally, yes. Because it's a matter on how you solve the problem, okay? It's if you need the full system in full capacity for a full year for a capability system, that's very good, but you are the king, eh? But if you need it for capability, which will be more the cases because you may be running maximum 1/10 of the system at the same time completely, that's good enough. Yes, because the consequences of the operation of your machine can be very different. Yes, because if you want the capability, you have to wait that all the other jobs are completed to start to do it. Yeah. So for this very large allocation, So the project description, it's very hard. So the capacity of the user requesting this capacity on a petascale system is extreme, but on a prexascale system, you can imagine the amount of hours you will need to analyze the results coming out of this simulation, the amount of service you have to have in your own center to follow the executions you are launching. You have to stay all day on. This is very complex executions. Okay? So if the scientists are going to the telescopes, they spend the nights on there. And during the nights they are allocated, they are awake continuously. Okay? So if they have very big allocations, they have to demonstrate they are having the capacities to follow them. No.
Branislav Jancic, IT for Innovations. I think we should not recommend any fixed percentage to the Access Committee, but I think we should recommend that the Access Committee is optimizing the combined scientific output of all projects that are coming out. Well, if we should quantify the sum of the impact of the future papers that is there. And of course, if there is one single project that is going to outweigh the combined scientific output of everyone else, then maybe it's a good deal. But otherwise, there is probably there will always be a share for the different projects.
I think it's important that we give some power to this access committee and some flexibility. And the only thing we have to take care is that everybody feels represented or in the right way. So all of the community should be represented in the access committee. And if it's balanced, then it's just the best thing we can do. And I think that's very important if we talk about the process, how to set up the whole access process.
The opposite.
Yes, yes. And you give the power to that group to do it on a peer review, then it's okay, because the scientists decided this is a priority, this is a list.
So also the audience is having managers for supercomputing centers have a question regarding elastic access. So that, because this is having a different reading, okay? So are we ready to have time sharing of the HPC system on some resources to guarantee that you have access on these capacities? Guaranteeing that you are not the best performance on that partition, on those resources, but you are awarding users for these capacities? Because that's my reading on elastic access. Not that I'm flexible to have any user, any demand, no. It's that I am capable to, in a 5% of the partition of the system, I'm running time sharing, then users can submit applications and they can do debugging, they can do in parallel because they are not interested in performance. So I can have many users using the same hardware. Are we ready for that?
I have a question, Sergio. What do you mean by elastic? It's bypassing the access process we're defining? It's just a 5% center budget giving to the users locally, or what? Because you have prep access, you have this benchmarking access, you have the access.
No. This is within, normally it will be within the preparatory access. Are we prepared to have a specific access only through Q system? Are we prepared to give them access to interactive computing? Are we prepared to give them access in timeshare method so that they have not limited resources? That's it. So it's not another mechanism to get access, but once you are in, is the batch system the only method, or we have others? They think on that. I think it's a good idea.
They don't need it.
No, because that was on the questions from Evin, having the capacity for performing real executions. So if I need to perform a real execution, not for performance, but for the scientific result, for understanding whether my method is better approximate than a different one, my problem is not time to solution. My problem is the solution. So I don't care if I'm sharing resources.
But I think we agreed that we will put this under prep access method, and we say 5% for preparatory access, and then we have to decide what we do.
Do we agree 5% for preparatory?
Maybe. Not?
We didn't talk of percentage.
Okay.
Do we?
Any online questions? No new message from Oriol?
No. I paid for the question.
You paid only one.
I paid only. Any more questions here, or I let the chair to conclude?
No, I don't want to conclude it. Just general feedback to the discussion we have from your side. And you also can ask a lot of the members of the infrastructure advisory group, the work group, are present in the room. Erwin.
So one general thought about access to EuroHPC resources. I think we always need to make sure that there is a really strong need to access the European resources. We should avoid that we end up in a situation where people that, for whatever reason, don't get national resources, take then the back door via EuroHPC. So it's a tricky business, right? But there needs to be a real need to access EuroHPC resources.
So,
which can be size, of course, right? Because it's the largest resources. But when we are in a regime where it's can run both national or EuroHPC, I think there needs to be a need that you go to EuroHPC.
So we never discussed to restrict the applications to the typical European requirements, saying at least 3 partners out of Europe. No, we shouldn't touch this. It should be open for, but there should be. What does cheaper mean? Easier to get access, lower requirement, lower threshold. Okay.
I have certain sympathy for your concern. However, we cannot exclude any user from any European country, being member state or associated to Horizon 2020, to request access to the EuroHPC access time, irrespective of his country is part or not of the joint undertaking, irrespective if they have a national machine or not. The question for us is rather, is the access justified to the machine based on scientific excellence criteria, whatever? If he was unsuccessful at home but is successful in the JU, there's no reason why we should discriminate this person.
Right. It's probably, as you said, it's probably a question to the scientific evaluation that this is strict enough. Yeah.
Do not forget that the access time we're making available through the joint undertaking is paid by everyone through Horizon 2020, CEF, and so on. So even if your country is investing, I don't know, 50 million in your own machine, we cannot exclude you also to come through the joint undertaking access time, because through the Horizon 2020 program, you're anyway paying for that.
I think I understand from you that you want to set the difficulty for getting access to EuroHPC higher than you have in your country. That to me is a problem, because that really depends on the capacity you have in your country and the excellence you have in your country. So if all the countries will be the same, I can find the agreement here, but it's not the same. So if you go to Switzerland, they have huge machines, but they have huge science there. So maybe a large number of people is not getting access to the Swiss machine, but they will be able to get access in the European machine because the scientific threshold is lower, because you have more capacity available in Europe. So for me, it will be difficult to make the level at the European level.
Yes, I think everyone is quite critical for the national systems, or for the countries not having a system on a national level. So then you restrict the access for the smaller countries, not part of a consortium. If you put it, they only have the chance to get on the European, to get resources on the European level. Okay. I had a last question. Do you think you are prepared, the process, implemented like this? Do you think we will support science and industry in Europe in the best way we can do with all these boundary conditions, requirements, and regulations, perfect regulations? Mina, do you think it's okay, it's fair? Yes or no?
Whatever. I don't find the minutes anymore, but you had 3 standards and okay, special access is clear. It's a decision at a higher level. Because you're asking whether we are ready.
Yes.
So are you ready? Do you have all the details? Do you have everything written down and decided?
No, Maria Katze, I think it's the next step. We're talking about we are talking about the requirements and the ideas and the requirements of the users. What should be supported? Now it's a question of implementation. Yes, and we have to discuss and recommend to the joint undertaking and a recommendation. And I think very important is the discussion with PRAISE, because they have a lot of experience how to implement this, and we should take into the yes. And therefore, I'm asking, do you have any additional recommendations, and based on your experience with PRAISE, how to implement in this process in a very efficient way?
So for me, this definition is implementation. This is the executive director who should be implemented, and the recommendation is stating that we are considering that PRAISE was doing very well on the access committee and the peer review administration. So it should be aligning adequately with that. And Gustav, I think, indicates already they are in analysis. Huh?
Okay, any other ideas, comments? Danielle? Everybody's fine. Sinead, the vice chair? No. Nuria, something from SSC, perspective of SSC? No. You want to go to lunch now? Then the summary. Thank you very much. I think thank you for discussing the ideas, and you see on your, maybe you had also the experience or made the experience that we discussed it very intensively within our group. And thank you for the picture, Norbert. And thank you for supporting us.